All right, hi. For this language experiment, we have some participants reading a poem, and we're considering the enduring question, how should context affect interpretation? So to kick us off, I'm gonna go over to my coworker teacher, my coworker Sarah, and ask her what she thought of the poem.
I like the poem. It was kind of difficult to understand, at least on the first read. It took me a couple of reads before I felt like I could wrap around it, but I enjoy it. I think it's beautiful. Do you want me to talk about meaning?
At the bottom there are two questions. One is, what is the poem about? And the second one is, what do you make of the meaning of the ending?
I think the poem is about death. I think it's kind of written from the perspective of death, personified, and talking to humans about mortality, about dying. And the ending, I think, I'm not sure about the ending. I think it's about the inevitability of death, that you can't escape it. And so the thing about never hope to say farewell, like the death is always present, and Earth's frankly brutal drum, like that is just kind of the nature of life. This was long ago decided. It's all kind of that death is inevitable, and that what we shall become, one evaporating sigh, kind of we end in nothingness with death.
Awesome, that's pretty profound. So over here we have Jeff, and you have the same poem, but in addition to the poem, you've gotten a short paragraph explaining some of the context of who the author is, right? It's W.H. Auden, homosexual poet from England, and this is the title of the poem is Postscript, Ariel to Caliban, echoed by the prompter. So with that additional information, what did you think the poem was about?
Well, I thought it was about death. I think that's dominant, but I also felt it's about life and love.
Okay.
And so it forced me to wonder about the relationship between the poet and this dialogue between Ariel and Caliban. And so, in a way, I wish I didn't know about the poet, because I felt in some ways it's distracting me, because I'm seeking to make connections between the poet's sexuality and personal romantic history and what I know of Ariel and Caliban using this text. So, in a way, I wish I knew less.
I know you wish you knew less. That's interesting. So, what do you think? Is Sarah, now knowing this like additional information? I mean, it seems like it does change how we read it in some capacity. Does that make one reading better than the other, or how should we interpret literature?
Well, for me, the thing that's beautiful about poetry is that it's so personal, right? And that for each person it can mean something slightly different, and that doesn't mean that interpretation is right or wrong. I always teach my students that they don't have to necessarily understand every single line to get a sense of a poem and connect to a poem. So for me, kind of like what Jeff said, I like it as a personification of death and kind of open to the interpretation of the reader. I think it depends on what you're using it for in class. If you're using it like as an additional piece of text to go with is it The Tempest?
Yeah.
With The Tempest, then you would want them to have that background information. But if you were having them just read it on its own, I think for a poetry unit, maybe you would not give them the context, or maybe not till afterwards.
Definitely.
I couldn't agree more. I think it really depends on your purpose and goals.
Right on. Cool. Thanks so much, guys, and see you around.
Okay.
Cheers. This language experiment, it works really well paired with Michel Foucault's What is an Author, or Barthes' The Death of an Author, as you consider the changing role of authorship as it applies to interpretation. Cheers.